Hello again, and welcome to another step in conquering the family class in preparing for your ICCRC Full Skills Exam. So this lesson is on orphaned family members. Now on the IRCC website, and in a lot of places, actually you see orphaned family members under Other. So we talked about the lonely family member before, which is also often grouped under Other. And the second piece of that, of course, has to do with orphaned family members. Now you have all these links, of course, under the video on the website. The IRCC website is really good for this. The sponsorship guide over here, IM5196, covers this pretty thoroughly. And OP3 section 5.20 covers this as well. You're going to see that this topic in general is pretty concise, and as such it is a really great topic for you to study for your full skills exam. Of course, you'll have to work through OP2 and IP2. The topic of orphaned family members just comes up a little bit in each one of these, but again, when you look through those manuals over and over again, it really helps to solidify your knowledge of the family class in general. In your regulations, you have this under Regulation 4 and 117, and those regular family class regulations as well. So let's take a look at these requirements. Now, when we look at requirements, remember we're always looking at two sides of this. So the first one is, of course, with the person sponsoring the other person, and the other requirement has to do with the orphan himself or herself. Now, just going back to the sponsor requirements. So someone could sponsor a family member, of course, if they're over 18, Canadian citizen or permanent resident. They have to live in Canada. There has to be that agreement, of course. In this case, with orphans, they have to prove the LICO for the past 12 months. We talked about co-signers before, when we talked about parents and grandparents. And, of course, co-signers play a role in family sponsorship across the field, really. Okay, the person can't be in prison or anything like that, and the undertaking, in this case, is 10 years. So when we dig into those regulations, with Regulation 117, we can see that in 1F, it covers orphaned family members. So the person who is an orphan has to have, their parents have to be deceased. The orphan himself has to be under 18, and he can't be married or in a common law relationship. In addition to this, you have some family requirements. So the next section there deals with the relationship to the sponsor. But in general, remember that the big ones, for now anyways, are that the orphan has to be under 18 and the orphan cannot be married or in a common law relationship. So these are two big first requirements. We'll dig into the others in the next slide. Let's take a look at those family relationships now. So in your regulations and in the manuals, you get a lot of descriptions like this where they're slightly complicated, but the people who wrote them are obviously legal experts. So we'll just make this easier for ourselves because we're studying for the full skills exam. Now, a child of the sponsor's mother or father means the brother or sister of the person A child of the sponsor's mother or father means a nephew or a niece. And finally, a child of the sponsor's child means a grandchild. Alright, so this is of course in your test day data book in a simplified version. But essentially we're looking at someone who is orphaned, so a person whose parents are deceased, under 18, not married or in a common law relationship, and who is the brother or sister, nephew, niece, or grandchild of the sponsor. So let's take a look at who can sponsor who. Now this is the same family chart that we've been using throughout the other family lessons. And you can see this one, there's a little difference between this one and some of the previous examples that we saw. So we have the people on the left as deceased, so there's an X over them. And you can see that they have 2 kids. Now the kids are under 18. We have the Mexican flag there, so let's pretend that they're Mexican. And then we have the other family on the right, who are Canadian. Now what I want you to do is think of who can sponsor who in this case, specifically as an orphaned family member. So take a minute and see if you can figure out who can sponsor who, if there is anybody who can sponsor anybody through that specific little stream. Okay, so let's see if you figured this one out. Now remember that in order for a person to be sponsored as an orphaned family member, that person has to be under 18. Now that person cannot be married or in a common law relationship. The person, of course, has to be medically admissible. And in terms of the relationship between that person and the sponsor himself or herself, the orphan has to be the nephew or niece, the sibling, or the grandchild of the sponsor. Now with this, there are 2 people who could potentially be sponsored. And just a little tip for you in case this comes up in your exam, if the person is sponsoring both of those kids, then there would need to be 2 applications. Okay, so if you figured out that their aunt can sponsor both of them or either of them, then you got this correct. There isn't anybody else who can really sponsor them, because if you look at number 4, 3, 2, 1, obviously 4, 3, and 2 don't fit into that relationship category. Because the orphans, so those kids who are under 18, they are not the nephews or nieces of the people at 432. They're not their grandchildren or siblings, instead they're cousins. And of course, the baby at number 1 can't sponsor anybody. Remember, when we're looking at co-sponsorship, the husband at number 5 can co-sponsor with the wife at number 6. And in terms of family sponsorship for orphans, you can see that when we take a look at adoptions later on, you're going to see that there are quite some similarities between the two procedures. So first of all, the officers would have to have written consent from the authorities in the other country. This would make sure that the child can legally leave the country, that there's no human trafficking or anything like that happening. Also, they would need to have written consent from any legal guardians. So if that child falls under the legal guardianship of someone else after the death of his or her parents, then they would have to consent to giving up the child as well. And finally, the officer would counsel the sponsor to obtain legal guardianship of that child when the child arrives in the country. And this would, of course, make sure that the legal guardian is completely responsible for the child and is, of course, legally 100% responsible for the child as well. So you can see that's very, very, very similar to an adoption. Okay, so this is a very concise topic for you to study for your full skills exam. And just by looking at this topic for probably an hour, you will really be able to tick this one off of your to-do list. So it's a very, very good topic to study. And I hope that this video helped you. And all the resources that are linked under this video, make sure you work through them. Because again, it's a very, very good topic to study. In terms of your exam, it's very concise, and it will hopefully help you to take a step closer to passing your full skills exam. All right, well, thank you very much. Have a really great day, and enjoy the rest of the lessons.